There is not one verse of Scripture that tells any Christian to build a building and call it a church. And you study the architecture, those things are pagan Greek Parthenons with a phallic obelisk on top that they call steeple. I showed it in the Independent Fundamental Baptist Catholicism studies, proven from architectural sources, from sources showing the history of these things. Bible-believing Christians down through the centuries never met in buildings. But part of Satan's conspiracy here in the last few hundred years, most of these Babel buildings were built by Freemasons. They are satanic Baal temples, phallus houses, Babel buildings. We have all kinds of fun names for them. I had a brother recently write and call them goat sheds. I thought that was pretty good. I like that one. Goat shed. Not a sheep barn, but a goat shed. I thought that was pretty good. But you see, when you are under a cursed building like that, I mean, you know, I'm going to be a little bit graphic here, but just deal with it. Imagine if there was some kind of a pagan temple, and instead of a steeple on top, it was a large statue of a man's member. Would you walk into it? You say, well, of course not. What are you doing going into one that has a steeple on top? Well, brother, you see, but you need to quit making excuses for these stinking church buildings. There's just so many problems that go along with those things, brethren. I've been in them for years and years and years. The majority of my life, I've been in and out of these stinking church buildings. It's time to drop the fantasy of it. It's time to drop it. It's not pleasing to God. And I can show you, I can prove to you from history, and I showed it in my study, that the Catholic Church is the one that sanctified pagan temples and brought them in as pagan Romans and said, okay, we're going to take that pagan temple and we're going to worship in there. And that's what you're doing, you Baptists out there and Methodists and whatever else, you know, what you want to be. You are worshiping in pagan temples. And you think that you can be in those places and that God's not going to have an issue with that. And all that you can do to cite proof of it is cite the great men of the past and things. Those great men of the past all had problems. And every single one of those great men of the past, their Babel building fell apart after they died, proving that it was a cult of personality. That's what the thing was. And a lot of those great men of God, unfortunately, if you start doing the research, they're Freemasons. Members of the Masonic Lodge. That's why their big temples were built. You say, what are you making such a big point? Ephesians chapter 2, verses 20 through 22. The people are the building. We're Bible believers in all matters of faith and practice. Do you realize when you're saying that and you're in a church building, you are lying before God? To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Yes, you are in sin if you're in a church building. You're in very grievous, very serious sin. And you wonder why you have problems. I'll tell you right now, I can testify, my wife can testify, I can testify with a lot of people out there that have written to us and things over the years, and they've said, when I left the church building atmosphere, when I got out of the politics of the whole thing and all the little cliquey little, you know, things in social gospel and come together for the potluck supper and the little community get-togethers and all the events, when they left it, God blessed them tremendously. I know Baptist preachers that were called to the ministry. They've gone through seminary. They're going through the whole thing. And they get there. They got their church building. And all of a sudden, it's just like they start to see the truth about the church building thing, the past of it and everything else. And it's just like they say, you know what? I cannot say I'm a Bible believer in all matters of faith and practice and continue in this building. I know the history of these buildings. They're from the pagans. And see, it's not the same thing. People go, oh, what about the holidays? Listen, at the holidays, you can do the holidays and have Christmas lights and things like that and stuff. And some people say, no, I don't want to do it. Fine, whatever. Okay? But you can do those things without worshiping that ceremony, without worshiping that holiday. But people that are in church buildings, 100% of the time, they are worshiping their building. They're worshiping that cult that they're a part of. You need to get out of that. All right? If you want to be a Bible believer in all matters of faith and practice, then you better follow those words. All right? Yeah. And my wife brought up that point. She's working over here at her computer, and the fact of the matter is there are people that will say, I thank God for this church building. Something that God never even instituted in Scripture, and you're thanking Him for it. I see guys that I respect very highly, and they'll stand up and they'll say, it's good to be in the house of God. You're not in the house of God. All right? You're in the house of God in terms of Christians getting together and the whole body. Verse 21, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto an holy temple in the Lord, in whom ye also are builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit. It's the people, it's not the building. You say, well, then we can still meet in a church building. Brethren, when are you going to give up the fantasy? When are you going to give up this thing? When are you going to submit to the fact of saying these things are pagan in their origin? They're pagan, brethren. They are. They just are. Look it up. The whole reason I'm kind of rabbit trailing here a little bit from this study is because I see this thing of just like, all through the Old Testament, it's like, give up your pagan idols, give them up, give them up, give them. Well, I guess you're right. I'm in kind of conviction here. Are you going to give them up? No, but I am kind of convicted about it. And God's just going, okay, wrath, boom. He can't bless you if you have pagan idols. I can't tell you how many things we've burned here. Personal belongings and stuff like that, because the Lord convicts us. What are you doing with a Hollywood movie in your? Well, yeah, it's just to entertain. Get rid of it. It doesn't belong in there. Is that the kind of testimony you want to have when the rapture happens and people leave and they look on the shelf over there and they go, what's this all about? Get rid of it. If you're in a pagan temple and you're going and you're doing the same things that the Roman Catholics do, people look at that and they go, what is this? And there again, I've seen some of the stuff with the Jews coming out and they're going, I want to take a look at the New Testament and Jesus, but I'm not interested in this Roman Catholic Christianity. You know why they think all Christians are Roman Catholics? Because all Christians act like Roman Catholics that are going to the Babel buildings anyhow. I had a buddy years ago, just tell this little story here and then I'll continue with my study. Had a buddy years ago and he was witnessing and he was putting tracks on people's vehicles, and some guy came out and said, hey, get this thing off my vehicle. I don't want you putting that on my vehicle and stuff. And my friend went over and tried to witness the guy, and the guy was like, hey, I don't even want to talk about it. Just get out of here. I don't even want you in the neighborhood. Okay, get out or I'm going to call the police. And my buddy said to him, okay. He said, well, let me just say one thing before I leave, and that is if you ever get saved, make sure you don't go to church. And the guy was like, what did you just say? And he said, if you ever get saved, if you ever want to come to the Lord and get to know the Lord, it's a personal relationship. It's not about some church building someplace. And the guy was like, I thought that's what you said. And he said, what do you mean by that? My friend got a chance to witness to him. Oh, we're just so ineffective as a church. We need revival. It must be that our buildings that haven't worked. I mean, there again, this experiment with church buildings. I'll get back to the study in a minute here. Our experiment with church buildings. We've put hundreds of billions of dollars here as American Christians, and over in the UK and other places too. We put all this money, billions and billions and billions of dollars, into church buildings. Then why is it more corrupt now than it was years ago? Why?